of shadows.
Hi my angels, it's Hailey Reese and I hope that you guys are having an absolutely amazing day today. Today's video is one that I've been meaning to talk about for quite some time now in a specific case that I have just been dying to share with those of you who have yet to have heard about it. And let me just tell you guys, cases like this and situations of watchers or stalkers or people lurking or peering in your windows or just watching you in general are the type of thing that send chills up my arms. You know, as you guys know, I grew up in a haunted house and I've had a ton of paranormal experiences and I'm super interested in the world of the paranormal. And while those things can get a little bit scary now and then, I'm not scared of ghosts, I'm not scared of the paranormal, but I am scared of the human race sometimes. The idea or the concept of somebody peering into my windows and essentially watching me and watching my every move for whatever motive they may have is so terrifying to me. I honestly can truly say I think I'm more afraid of murderers or, people breaking into my house than I am of anything to do with the paranormal. So this particular case and everything to do with it is very unsettling to me and very creepy to me. Let me know in the comments below what your guys' biggest fear is. Are you more afraid of like an intruder or a stalker / murderer? Or are you more afraid of the paranormal? I'm super curious to know because a lot of times people think that I'm crazy for being more afraid of things like that than anything ghostly, but you can't help what your fears are. So without further ado, let's get into the case of the Watcher and all of the really creepy things that transpired in the form of anonymous letters. So in June of 2014, Derek and Maria Broaddus, along with their 3 children, purchased their 6-bedroom dream home. The home was 657 Boulevard, and this move had been one that they had been anticipating for quite some time, and they were so excited about it, as anybody is when they're purchasing their home of their dreams. Now, a big reason that this was a really special move for Maria in particular is that this home was actually down the street from her childhood home, and the home was stationed in what was then the 30th safest city in America. So they were really excited to be going back towards Maria's home roots, but on the same token and at the exact same time, to be located in what was known as an extremely safe area. I mean, anywhere that you go has their issues, has their things. Nowhere is deemed completely safe, but this area was notorious for being safe and very family friendly. So they were super ecstatic about that as well. They'd actually purchased the home for $1.3 million, and they were just so excited to be moving their family into the home and to be able to raise their children within those walls. But what the family didn't know at the time was that their whole world was about to be turned upside down by an unseen force or an unseen individual known as the Watcher. And the family didn't know that the dream of moving into this dream home was really shattered before they even moved in, because the house came with a very, very dark secret. So right away, they kind of began fixing up the home prior to even moving into it. And one day in particular, Derek was inside of the home painting it, getting it ready for the big day that the family would be moving in. And as he walked outside of the home, he decided to take a quick peek into their new mailbox. And that was when he was shocked to see a white envelope addressed simply to the new owner. Now this was a little bit alarming to Derek. He'd only thought that on his way out of the house he'd take a quick peek in the mailbox and was certainly not expecting to be met with a letter directed to the new owner. So curiously, Derek opened up the envelope to be met with a neatly folded handwritten letter that would just horrify and chill him to his core. The letter read, and I quote directly, "Dearest new neighbor at 657 Boulevard, allow me to welcome you to the neighborhood. How did you end up here? Did 657 Boulevard call to you with its force within. 657 Boulevard has been the subject of my family for decades now, and as it approaches its 110th birthday, I have been put in charge of watching and waiting for its second coming. My grandfather watched the house in the 1920s, and my father watched the house in the 1960s. It is now my time. Who am I? There are hundreds and hundreds of cars that drive by 657 Boulevard each day. Maybe I am in one. Look at all the windows you can see from 657 Boulevard. Maybe I am in one. Look out of the many windows in 657 Boulevard at all the people who stroll by each day. Maybe I am one. So first and foremost, I want to stop there before I even continue on to the rest of the details of this initial letter. Because even for myself, if I'd ever even just read that, the unknown and the chillingness of not knowing if the car passing by is this person, or the windows surrounding you have this person peering out at you through them, or if the person crossing by on the street is this individual. But then the letter takes an even darker turn and becomes all the more specific, catered to the family, saying, and I quote, "You have children. I have seen them. So far, I think there are 3 that I've counted. Do you need to fill the house with the young blood I requested? Better for me. Was your old house too small for your growing family? Or was it greed to bring me your children? Once I know their names, I will call to them and them to me." And then it was signed by the watcher. And to me, that's where this letter really takes the darkest turn of all, is that this isn't just an individual playing a prank on a new neighbor saying, you know, the car in the street could have me in it, or the windows around you could have me within them. But now it's specific. It's an individual who has counted the amount of children, who is threatening to call out to the children. So after returning home and sharing the contents of this letter with his wife, they decided to reach out to John and Andrea Woods, who were the previous owners of the home. Now, here's where things get a little bit interesting. The Woods claimed that they had never received letters like that in all of their 23 years of living in the home, except once, a couple of days prior to moving out. They said that they never felt watched while living there, and that in fact, they would more often than not even leave their door unlocked. They felt so safe where they were living. They never felt like anybody was stalking the home, and they felt so safe, in fact, they would leave their doors unlocked. So they had said that when they had received their first letter in all of their 23 years, which they claim was just a couple of days prior to leaving the home, they decided that they were just gonna throw it out because they didn't feel that it was anything threatening enough to have disclosed to the new buyers of the home. They didn't feel like it was a real threat. They'd had an amazing time having lived in the home, so they felt like it was just kind of nonsense and nothing of significance to disclose to the new buyers. So they went to the police to report the letters, and Detective Leonard Lugo actually told the family to not disclose to any of their neighbors that they'd received such a letter, as all of the neighbors were kind of deemed suspects. When you're new to a neighborhood and all of a sudden you're receiving this letter, you're gonna think that it might be someone else in the neighborhood, either playing a prank or trying to mess with the new neighbors or whatever the case may be. So they were told to just not tell anybody about the experience and to keep the police updated. Now, I think it's a really important thing to note that around the time of the Broaddus family receiving their first letter from the Watcher, another family on the boulevard had also received a letter from the Watcher, but they lived in their home for so many years and all of their children were grown and moved out, so they discarded it, like the Woodses claimed that they had discarded it, and didn't think much of the letter either. So 2 weeks after they just received the first letter from the Watcher, Maria Broaddus had went back to the home to actually check out some paint samples. And at this time, she decided to check the mail as well. And right away, she saw this letter right in the mailbox and recognized the writing. Except this time, the letter was addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Broaddus, but it was spelled totally wrong. In fact, it was spelled like how you might spell it if you just heard it. It was like Broaddus instead of Broaddus. Well, okay, you can't really say the different ways of spelling, but you get what I'm saying. It was like as if somebody had heard and spelt it out the way that they would from like ear to penmanship. So this raised a red alarm as well, So this raised a red flag as well, because was the Watcher close enough to hear them being addressed as Mr. and Mrs. Broaddus, and that's how he spelled that out on the letter. That was really, really creepy to Maria. In this letter, the Watcher boasted about having learned a lot about the Broaddus family in those past 2 weeks, and that he knew more about their children too. The letter actually addressed the Broaddus' kids by their birth age, so like from oldest to youngest, and even called them by their nicknames that Maria had been yelling and calling for them with. And it said, and I quote, "I am pleased to know your names now, and the name of the young blood you have brought to me. You certainly say their names often." The letter then asked about a child in the family, one of their children in particular, who whoever had written this letter had seen utilizing an easel in an enclosed space in the home, asking, is she the artist in the family? And then the letter gets even darker and even more creepy. And I quote, "It has been years and years since the young blood ruled the hallways of the house. Have you found all of the secret it holds yet? Will the young blood play in the basement? Or are they too afraid to go down there alone? I would be very afraid if I were them. It is very far away from the rest of the house. If you were upstairs, you would never hear them scream. Will they sleep in the attic, or will you all sleep on the second floor? Who has the bedroom facing the street? I will know as soon as you move in. It will help me to know who is in which bedroom. Then I can plan better." Like, could you guys even imagine receiving these types of letters, of somebody knowing that one of your daughters used an easel, of somebody knowing kind of the layout of your home? Mind you, the house was for sale, so it could always have been somebody who was going through the house and they knew kind of that there was a basement, an attic, a bedroom facing, one portion of the house. But either way, to receive these letters detailing that they know your children's nicknames, they know like the ages of your children, they know your last name now, even if they don't know how to spell it, they know how to pronounce it enough to write it that you know they actually know who you are. And at this point in the case, for me, it's just so eerie to think that anybody is watching enough to accumulate these details and then use these details to write letters to scare and threaten you. I couldn't even imagine, but let's continue. So the Woods family, who had sold them the home, denied having any knowledge of who could be sending these letters to the family, and they even denied having been told to sell the house to somebody, as it said in the letter. It said that they were told to sell the house, and they denied that as well. So at this point, the whole entire case was so bizarre, and nobody knew what to make of it, but the family was really, really uncomfortable. Derek and Maria stopped bringing their kids to the house, which rightfully so. I definitely wouldn't want to be bringing my children there after that letter either. And they began feeling unsure as to when or even if they would move into the house. After a couple of weeks, a third letter arrived saying, "Where have you gone to? 657 Boulevard is missing you." Now, one of the suspects, and I'll get more into it when I get down into the theories of who this actually may have been, was their next door neighbors. Not long after these letters had arrived, the prosecutor's office gave the family some good news that they had ruled out the Langford family, which was right next door to them, as potential suspects in this case. And by the end of the year, the investigation as to who the Watcher could be was really at a halt. There was no trail, there was no evidence, there was no real solid suspects. There was no evidence leading in any direction as to who could be leaving these letters. But one thing was for certain was that Derek and Maria were in a state of paranoia. Anytime they would go anywhere near the property, they felt they were being watched, which who wouldn't after letters like that? And they felt as though they just couldn't live their day-to-day life properly or safely anymore. Around this time, the Broadduses kind of launched their own investigation. Like, Derek became pretty obsessed with trying to figure out who was doing this. They set webcams up in 657 Boulevard. They would, at night, Derek would be within the home in the complete dark, watching and peering out of the windows, hoping to catch a glimpse of somebody putting a letter in a mailbox or somebody lurking around where they shouldn't be. They hired private investigators to stake out the house and even approached the FBI, and they were really trying to do anything that they could to come to a conclusion of who it was sending these letters. But nothing other than the physical physical copy of the letter that the family had led to anything other than dead end after dead end after dead end, which was so frustrating for the Broaddus family. The family became so fearful of who the Watcher was and what the Watcher would do, and unfortunately their previous home had already sold. So they were kind of in this financial pit of having just bought this $1.3 million home, not feeling comfortable to move into it, having sold their previous home, and they were living with family members because they'd never even gotten the chance to move into the home before the letters had scared them away from doing so. They decided to make the decision to list their home and hopefully sell it to somebody else, because what was once their dream home now held this extreme state of fear and the unknown for the family, and they just didn't even want it anymore, which is so sad too. Like, could you guys imagine having found what you thought was your dream home, being so excited to move into this $1.3 million 6-bedroom home to raise your 3 kids, and then being met with so much fear? I just couldn't even imagine. But the family decided to list the house. By this time, though, the case of what had been going on had been put over the media, and rumors were flying around, and this really put a damper on any potential buyers. Nobody wanted to buy into the home that a family had been scared away from even before moving into it. They knew of the letters, a lot of people had been talking about it, so nobody felt safe to buy the house, and it put them in even more of a horrible situation, which is just so sad. Even at a severely reduced price, the Broaddus family was having difficulty finding anybody who wanted to purchase the home, and this put them in a real financial predicament, prompting them to threaten legal action against the Woods family for having not disclosed to them prior to buying the home that they had received letters as well. They were frustrated that the family prior had been receiving letters, no matter how long or how many, as that was never really specified, and that they wouldn't tell the buyers to look out for this and let them make the choice if they still wanted to move in. So they threatened legal action against the Woods family. They even did whatever they could to try to have the house just demolished. They just didn't want anything to do with the house anymore, and nobody else did either, so they thought the house would be better off completely demolished. The Broaddus family thought about selling it to a developer. However, their plans for the house would be less than 3 feet too small for the mandated size in the neighborhood, and the developer's proposal was rejected. But in 2018, the same proposal was approved for a house just around the corner. Now, Maria was so frustrated. This neighborhood had held so many dear memories for her for so long in her life. She chose to come back. They found their dream house. She wanted to raise her children there. And now every single attempt to even get rid of the place that was supposed to be their dream home was being ripped away from them time and time and time again, and just putting them into more and more of a financial predicament. In spring of 2016, just 2 years after the Broaddus family had received the first letter, they actually found somebody to rent the home. The family had 2 large dogs and grown children, and there was actually a clause placed in the lease that claimed that they had the right to kind of cancel out their lease and move out if another letter was received. In 2 weeks, another letter arrived reading, "To the vile and spiteful Derek and his wrench wife Maria, 657 Boulevard survived your attempted assault and stood strong with its army of supporters barricading its gates. My soldiers of the boulevard followed my orders to a T. They carried out their mission and saved the soul of 657 Boulevard. With my orders. All hail the Watcher." Maybe a car accident, maybe a fire, maybe something as simple as an illness that never seems to go away but makes you feel sick day after day after day after day. Maybe the mysterious death of a pet. Loved ones suddenly die. Planes and cars and bicycle crash. Bones break. You are despised by the house. And the Watcher won. Like, what on earth does that even mean? It almost sounds like something supernatural, spiritual, dark, like magic type thing was going on with the home. But despite having received another letter, the renters decided to stay just as long as more cameras were added to the house, and the family had a plan that after years of no letters, they would attempt to sell the house again. The police eventually closed the case, and it has remained unsolved ever since. There was such a lack of evidence in the case that there was not enough leads at any point in time throughout this entire case for anybody to be taken in as a real suspect. And even if they were taken in as suspects, nobody was able to be held accountable or even brought enough to the table whatsoever to be considered a major suspect in the case. This case was so ridiculously untied in every single aspect. So who were the potential suspects in this case of the Watcher? Well, the very first suspect was the gamer. At 11 p.m. one night, while detectives were scoping out the house, a suspicious car stopped in front of 657 Boulevard for a pretty long time. The car was actually traced to a young woman who was located in a town nearby. The home of her boyfriend was actually on the same block as 657 Boulevard was. She told the detectives that her boyfriend was into some really, really dark video games, even one that he played as a character called the Watcher. The gamer actually never came into any of his interviews with the police, and unfortunately, they didn't have enough evidence against him to force him to do so. So he was never interviewed, and he was kind of dropped as a suspect due to lack of evidence. But I do find it kind of strange that he played his game as the Watcher. He was on the same block, and he refused to come into any of his police interviews. So a little bit weird, but they were unable to bring him in because of laws protecting his rights, and he had never done anything enough or substantial enough other than like a car parked out in front of the house for a while to have to be brought in for questioning. The next is the theory that the Broadduses were doing this all to themselves, which I find to be very highly unlikely. Who would want to go through this for so long and to not even move into their home and let it sit there and fall into really terrible financial circumstances, all for some greater ploy. But a couple of locals found it rather suspicious that the Broadduses moved from a $325,000 home to a $1.3 million home with refinanced mortgages. Some accused them of maybe getting themselves in over their heads, that maybe they were a little in over their heads with the home, and that maybe they turned to this plot to try to get themselves out of the situation that they got themselves into. Locals also found it weird that they were constantly renovating the home, but that they never moved into it. But something that's really important to note is that like major movie studios reached out to the family to try to get them to sell them their story, and they denied all of those offers. They didn't want the money from the studios to sell their story. So if they were really in a financial predicament and this was all just a plot for them to make some money, wouldn't you think they would have taken that opportunity? Another theory is that it was just somebody in the neighborhood, that a neighbor was trying to scare or threaten them. Maybe they were bored, maybe they were just really bitter and angry people, maybe that they were a little bit sick and twisted, but that it was somebody in the area just putting the letters in for whatever reason that may be. The private investigator did find 2 child sex offenders within the neighborhood, and Bill Woodward, the Broaddus' house painter, had actually noticed something rather strange about the neighbors behind their home. He claimed that the couple behind the Broaddus' home kept 2 lawn chairs creepily close towards their property, and that one day he looked out into the backyard and saw an older gentleman sitting in one of the chairs, except he wasn't facing his own home, he was facing the Broaddus' home, which he found to be kind of creepy. So maybe there was some strange people in the neighborhood leaving some kind of creepy letters. So that was another theory, was that it just was a surrounding neighbor. But one of the bigger suspects in this particular case was the Broaddus' neighbor named Michael Langford, and he lived in the house right next door to the Broadduses. Now, the house that he lived in next door actually belonged to his 90-year-old mother. All of her kids that were all in their 60s, they all still lived with their mother. And a lot of people in the neighborhood kind of saw that as strange, that all of the kids in their 60s still lived with their mother, but they were seen as strange, yet harmless. Now here's where it gets like kind of interesting, and it kind of leads you to wonder if perhaps this is where the letters were coming from. So they've lived in the house since the 60s, which is when the Watcher claimed his father watched the house. Michael's father actually died 12 years before the very first letter arrived, which could be why the Watcher claimed to have done the job of watching for the better part of 2 decades. Michael was also known to spook new neighbors and had some pretty odd behavior of walking through the yards of other people and even sometimes peering in their windows. Due to the layout of the house, Michael would have had a perfect view to where the Broaddus family had set up the easel for their daughter. Police actually questioned Michael after the first letter, but there was no evidence linking him to it, and he denied. But many people thought that it would be pretty reckless for Michael to continue sending letters after the police already came and interviewed him after the first letter, and a lot of people who knew him claimed he'd be incapable of having sent those letters. In cooperation with the Westfield police, the Broadduses sent a letter to the Langfords announcing plans to tear down the house, hoping to prompt a response, but nothing happened. Detective Lugo actually brought Michael in for a second interview, which also got nowhere and didn't lead to any more leads. And then his sister Abby accused the police of harassing her family. Eventually, the Broadduses hired Lee Levitt, a lawyer who actually met with several members of the Langford family, as well as their attorney, to show them the letters, along with photos showing how their home was one of the few places where that easel could have been seen. Essentially sitting down with them and saying, hey, here's what's in the letters, and hey, your house kind of lines up to where the easel was, so perhaps the easel was spotted from in your home. The meeting grew tense, and the family continued Michael's and their innocence. Which, on the contrary as well, imagine how frustrating it would be if you were not sending these letters and you were constantly being accused of having noticed the easel and having sent these letters and you weren't. This whole entire case is frustrating for every single person involved, especially those innocent who are being dragged into this case as well. Here's where things get a little more interesting, guys. DNA was later found on the letter, and it was deemed a woman's DNA. So now a whole turn in the thing was that these letters were perhaps being written by a woman. It was a woman's DNA found on the letter. So then they thought that Abby Langford, his sister, was the one who was sending the letters rather than Michael. But there was no match to Abby, causing detectives to rule out the Langfords as suspects, as I mentioned earlier in the video. So it was made pretty clear that it was not Michael and it was not Abby, leaving their neighboring family completely innocent after having been harassed, because it is harassment if you haven't done anything and you're continuously labeled as a suspect. But what's frustrating about cases like this is there's no real leads and a family feels as though they are in grave danger. So the police are gonna do all that they can do to try to solve it, and they hope that those who are innocent will cooperate to prove their innocence, you know? Either way, this whole entire case has baffled me. What's even crazier is that it's a pretty recent case, as I'm sure you guys can tell. So nobody knows who in the world the Watcher was. And one thing that's super eerie about the case is that the Watcher remains at large today. Meaning, since it was so recent and they never caught who was sending the letters, the individual could very well still be out there. I know this was a longer case. There are so many details of it. But what's so sad is that there was a family that thought they were moving into their dream home and unfortunately was unable to do so and went through years of torment and paranoia and feeling unsafe in the home that they were so excited to buy. And I just can't even begin to fathom how that must feel. I can't even think for myself who could have written these letters, who sent the letters. It just doesn't make any sense to me. I do wonder though, if you had surveillance cameras out at all times, wouldn't you eventually have to catch somebody putting the letters in the mailbox? I don't know, but either way, I am so curious to hear what you guys think of this case. Please, please, please let me know in the comments below. Like I said, things like this freak me out a lot more than paranormal stuff most of the time. The idea of somebody peering in your windows, watching your children, watching your every move, knowing things about you that they shouldn't know is just so creepy. So please let me know in the comments below what you guys think, who you think may have done it, and what you would do in a similar situation. Well, you guys, that is it for today's video. I really hope that you guys enjoyed it. If you enjoyed today's video, please give it a big thumbs up. And while you're at it, please go ahead and click that subscribe button. Join the Reese's Pieces. We would love nothing more than to have you. We are slowly approaching fall season, and if you don't know, every single October, I upload for 31 days straight. It is 31 days of Halloween. It is spooky content back to back to back for the entire month of October. And then I do a whole entire month again for the month of December. So now is the best time for you guys to kind of jump on board and get in on all the spooky content. Remember, my loves, do all things with kindness. And until next time, I love you guys.